Shibe from Northeast Collaborative is here this morning, so they took on the exciting opportunity of looking at the removal of the portables and a review of the libraries. And he's here this morning just to give initial thoughts around that and a draft about those thoughts and what he observed in the district. And with that, I'll let John make his presentation. John, good morning. Welcome back again. John started this in spring, so to speak, and we had to stop along the way, but we re-engaged in the process, and he visited all the schools, as you would imagine, met with people, also talked to SLAM because of Oxridge. So he's here to share some of his schematics and thoughts around the project. So with that, Mr. Shibe, welcome.
Thank you all very much. John Shibe from Northeast Collaborative Architects. We're honored to be working with the district on this study because I think the idea here was to combine the elimination of the portable classrooms at Hindley, Royal, and Holmes with enhancements to all of the schools for the library media centers. And we quickly, as going through this process, we started with a process where we would, We started with a process where we would engage the, work with Rich and Mike on the facility side of things, and then start meeting with Joan McGittigan on the library and media center learning commons side of things. And then we ultimately met with high school principal, or the school principals at the 3 elementary schools, and compiled a lot of that information, and then had some review sessions to talk about what are some of the opportunities and how can we shape some improvements to these, excuse me, largely the 3 elementary schools. So the final version of the study will look like written narrative. It'll expand on some of the, it'll include as an appendix the notes that were taken as far as those meetings, and then it will go through some diagrams. So really, I went through the more or less just an introduction of what we've done. Again, the major tasks involve space planning options. We're not getting into details of floor plans. It's really to give an overview. Opinions of the benefits and drawbacks of each options. Multiple options for each school were developed. So what you're seeing today is a refinement and a consolidation of the multiple options down to one option that provides a consistency among the improvements at each of those 3 elementary schools. I will say that the graphics for the high school, middle school, and Tokenique Elementary School, those library, media center, learning common spaces, those will come along later. For the most part, there's no expansion or contraction of those spaces, so that there's no major architectural change. It has a lot to do with fit and function and furniture and mobility and flexibility. So from that perspective, we can get further along with. We wanted to push along the elementary schools, the 3 elementary schools that have the greatest need. We were also asked to take a look at priority, see which of the elementary schools have the greatest priority. So I'll point out for a moment that after our initial meetings with Rich and Mike, and after review with the 3 elementary school principals, we did want to take a closer look at what's happening at Oxridge, because that's going to have an impact on how all of the other elementary schools look both now and should look in the future. So when we were tasked with, we did visit Tokenique, because that's a shining example of an elementary school in the district that's been completed not so long ago. We then took a look at the ed specs and the space program for Oxridge, and then looked at the plans. We've talked with Mike specifically and some of the members of the team from SLAM to try to understand what's happening in that library media center. But also, a couple things jumped out to everybody, and they said to us to say, let's take maybe a closer look at the gym spaces, because both Hindley and Royal have fairly small gyms. Hindley has a multi-purpose room, a lot of multi-purpose room aspects, because one side is performance and food service, the other side is gym, but also has some assembly capability. Royal does have a separate cafeteria, so at least there you have more of larger spaces within the building. Holmes had the largest gym of the three, so we were looking at square footages and function and performance and all that. So the net result of that was to develop some plans, and I'll just start going through the plan images. So, Michelle, jump to those diagrams. And the first diagram we'll look at is this Library Media Center Learning Commons zone diagram and example layout. And really, this is working from the library's reimagined process that occurred over the past couple of years. It looks at the types of functions that want to be a part of this library media center space as part of the reimagined area. A little less in the way of hard copy books, but more in the way of flexibility, performance. There are the zones on the right look at things like the teaching and research area, bookshelves and circulation. There's an overlapping notion of presentation area. Then there's small group, office and workroom. Then some of the specialty spaces like the makerspace, dedicated area for computers, an AV studio, a small AV studio with a green screen. Then at the elementary schools, there would be the story time area. At the middle school, kind of a lounge area, and then at the high school, a cafe environment. So taking all of that, we started looking at what those opportunities were. We came up with a prototypical layout. We started at about 4,500 square feet as a total space. We think there are some space saving opportunities, and we were able to come up with a prototypical layout of just about 4,000 square feet. And one of the key things that I think we started reviewing with Joan and Chris and the team was, how can we create that teaching research area in a way that it could be flexible enough to be a spare classroom if you ever needed it. So we were looking at ways that there could be some level of demountable walls, moving walls, with the mobile furniture already. Then we could look at a way that yellow zone could serve as a spare classroom if it was ever needed. It lives and breathes like a classroom in the space, so we wanted to look at with the right amount of flexibility, it could function that way. The other was the presentation area is a dashed area within more or less the blue on the lower right, the bookshelves and circulation area. But that presentation area can expand because all of the shelving would be on wheels, so that you have the flexibility to move shelving, expand table seating areas, et cetera, for larger presentations, larger group meetings within the Library Media Center Learning Commons area. So that's an overview of that layout. We'll take a look at how it gets implemented at some of the schools, but for the most part, we can move to Hindley, I think, is next. To take a look at one of these school layouts. So in terms of the proposed reduction of portable classrooms at Hindley, there are 5 of them. They encompass things like world language, music, IDEA, some office and support spaces. So we were looking at one alternative here is just to say, let's take those spaces, put them in a new addition, and we'll call it a day. But I think by introducing the Library Media Center component study to this, it's very important, because Hindley and Royal have not the best library media centers. They were additions I believe in the 1970s, possibly late 60s, but they are, the one at Royal hasn't had too much in the way of a major overhaul in terms of its windows and doors, et cetera. The one at Hindley has some significant mechanical issues to overcome. So it was looked at that, okay, if we're looking at building some additions here, then we'll certainly look at a new library media center learning commons. We'll certainly look at new a way to accommodate the programs that were taken out of the portables. What we did at Hindley in looking at that was to think about, if we created new band and music rooms, we're going to be implementing some new additions for band and music. And early on, one of the things that came out of all of our early discussions was the size of the gym, mentioned earlier, but the size of the gym at Hindley and the size of the gym at Royal specifically. Those were, it just so happens that the space that's left over for the gym would work nicely as a combination of music and band and orchestra rooms. If you split them up in half, and you have some nice storage components, and you could break the space down a little bit further but for now, to convert those gyms into music suites is a pretty viable option. It was among the multiple options we looked at. It was a strong contender for adaptive reuse of that space. And then in both situations, you have the performance space across the hall, so it's close to where you might have performances. So in looking at that, we looked at a new gym for these additions. The gym is 4,700 square feet, so it is a little bit smaller than Ox Ridge, but it is a little bit bigger than it's quite a bit bigger than what Hindley and Royal have today. It's about double the size. So taken as a whole, we were looking at the gym, the library media center, as an addition. There is a second floor component to this, which has some classrooms in it at the far. Most of the addition would occur at the far southeast, if I'm right, southeast portion of the site. Hindley does have. It is one of the larger sites at any of our schools, so it has some room to grow, and I think in the end it brings back. It doesn't impact your fields too much. It goes and you can replace paved play area with where the portables are removed. Removing the library media center actually does wonders for dressing the building back up and restoring its kind of historic facade along the street. So this was the general option arrived at for Hindley. And what I'll do is I'll go through each of the three schools first, and then we can maybe come back and do some review if that works. So the next, I think, is Royal. Looking at Royal here, what we're not seeing today is the report will have the existing plans. So sometimes we need to see existing and then the proposed. But with Royal, there is a 4-classroom addition just to the north of the current auditorium and gymnasium. And then there are portables north of that. So in essence, the proposal here with Royal was that those 4 classrooms, in addition to the portables, were not in great shape. They date, I believe, to the 60s, maybe even late 50s. But they were the early input was that they should be considered for replacement as well. So that meant looking at maybe more of a larger addition at Royal. So the library media center, the gymnasium, which would be the same 4,700 square feet, and then 4 classrooms at Royal. we don't really have the option to go 2 stories at Royal, because once you get past the gym, the gym and the auditorium, that's where the 2-story portion of Royal ends. So to extend a 2-story portion in that direction doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One of the things we tried to do was really focus on minimizing site impact. So in other words, we didn't want to say, let's put a small addition here, or a small addition there, or put the media center here, or put the gym there. The idea was to create a single space at each school that allowed for an addition. So similar approach here. The former gym becomes band, orchestra, and music. It's across from the auditorium. One of the keys to the Royal improvement internally is there's a stair in the corridor, and then there's a lift off the stair. This plan calls for removing the stair and putting in a ramp system so that you have more universal access throughout the building. So yeah, we can keep going with Holmes. I'll just keep going with the brief overview of the big picture part of it. So with Holmes had a different set of circumstances. It has an existing gym and an existing media center, library media center that the school really likes. That's the feedback we got there, was that outside of an acoustical transmission issue, which we've done some research on and can suggest some mitigation measures, but overall the issues at Holmes didn't have much to do with the overall kind of core and shell of the spaces that are contained within. When we look at replacing the portables at Holmes, we were looking at this idea that the music and orchestra and band can occupy rooms near the commons, which has the small platform performance area. So we've tried to keep those rooms again consistently close to the commons area. And then because we'd be using general classrooms, we were looking at general classroom additions. And that is a 2-story portion of the building. So the concept here was let's build a 2-story addition. Let's make the most of the square footage, because while Holmes didn't necessarily have as many internal demands for additional space, classroom space, it did have some expressed needs about offices in not ideal areas, undersized OTPT or special education. So the intent with Holmes was to consider the ability to create new classrooms, to then offload some existing classrooms such that they can be converted to an appropriate sized OTPT or special education. And then we were looking at some offices. You see there's some offices in those additions. There was a couple of offices were determined to be in not ideal locations. So we were looking at enhancing and providing space for additional offices. And then Holmes, we did the last overall plan with Holmes is the Library Media Center, which is just off to the, is there one more? So this would be allocating space within the existing Library Media Center to form the new one, which is reshuffled a bit. We're actually looking now at using the door to the north, to the right, as the main entrance. There is an existing door there, but we would look at revitalizing that for this purpose. And I know that there's a door shown to the east, but we'd be looking at closing that up in this particular instance. And then getting rid of the internal demountable wall partition that's within the current Library Media Center. So that frees up space for the makerspace and the AV green screen area. It's a bit smaller. This is I I think just about 3,000 square feet, whereas the others were about 4,000. The prototype shows about 4,000. But I think in terms of looking at how we can get the required numbers of shelving and the required numbers of all the functions, I think we can accommodate the space quite well here. It is a high volume space. It has a lot of it's a great environment for the type of functions that I want to put into a reimagined library media center. So in terms of looking at all of the schools comprehensively, and maybe can we backtrack to Hindley for a moment? And Hindley's probably the best one to look at. We started just for the brief overview. When we talked to well, I'll give you the story. The first time we visited Hindley, we were immediately pulled aside by some of the teachers and the principal and said, we have to do something about these small classrooms. The second floor had some small classrooms that we immediately started looking at in regard to the addition and classroom counts and how are we going to redistribute space within the building. And one of the things that we started looking at was at that second floor, when you start taking spaces out of the portable classrooms, we had world languages, IDEA, those kinds of spaces. We were looking at, can those be in smaller classrooms? And the initial feedback was yes, some of those components can be in smaller classrooms. But then we looked at, on that second floor, the proposed second floor plan, taking down some walls. You know, in one case, we're just taking down a wall between two rooms and creating a larger room, which yes, you go from 2 down to 1. But when you look at it, we were adding the 2 classrooms, and in the addition, and Hindley has 2 programs. The DSL, I think, is relocating out of Hindley and into Ox Ridge in 2022. So that was a little bit of the driver for then reusing those classrooms. On the first floor, we were going to relocate some office spaces and do a little bit more demolition of rooms so that you got some larger kindergarten rooms on the first floor near where the media center used to be. So I'm sorry, first grade. The kindergarten stays where it is over by the main offices. So we were looking at how that could be. This is the one school where we did start looking at, just scratching the surface at grade distribution, locations by grade, et cetera. The other schools, we haven't really delved into that as much, but I think it's you know, that's where this study, our task was, again, back to the portables and the library media center. It is something that could and should get some further study as to how the classroom counts are all going to balance, and are we really can you achieve larger classrooms and at the number you need, also through this design process? Because it only makes sense to try to solve all the ills at one time. It makes sense to do, if we're going to go ahead and do an addition to these buildings and then do some strategic demolition, it makes sense to get to the point where the school rooms are updated and they're balanced. And I think that's something that can be looked at further as we continue the work here. I think that is more or less the overview I wanted to provide. I'd love to talk if there's questions and a little bit more.
I'm sure there will be.
Yeah, I can offer more input on the process as well.
Okay, thank you, John. Do we have any questions? Katie?
Part where you left off, which is sort of the overarching question I think we all would have, and I think Hindley's a good example, a question of, renovating an imperfect building, right? We know the classrooms are small. We've all been in Hindley. I guess my question to Dr. Adley and to Mike is, are we throwing good money after bad when we do a renovation to a building that ultimately we may need to rebuild at some point? So I guess I would ask Mike Lynch, of the elementary schools that are left, would you say Hindley would be the next, in terms of, existing space, facilities, all of that, in terms of what we now need? Would that be your next building you would consider, like Oxford and Tokenique?
Well, it's almost a twin to Royal. They're 1 year apart. They're architecturally the same. As obviously the town used the same architectural firm, maybe the same contractor building them, and they're very well built. The original parts of both of those buildings are very well built. They have, glazed tile on the hallways, and the hallways are wide for an older building, an older elementary school. The hallways are wide. The classrooms are airy. They have big windows in them, brand new windows. I would say either Royal or Hindley would be the next one,
Right.
but it would definitely not be a situation like you had at Tokenique or Oxbridge, where you were going to replace a school that was built more out of urgency to find classroom space than actually, a really well-built building.
Right.
And they're both really well-built buildings. So it's not, you wouldn't be wasting money renovating this building as you would, say, with an Oxbridge.
Okay. Because when I look at the dollar numbers in this, they are large sums. So when you think about a Royal at $14 to $17 million, or 10 to 13 at Hindley, to me, the Holmes is a little more compelling because it seems like a smaller project you're keeping existing. But I wonder, as you said, with the gym on Hindley, it's smaller than Ox Ridge. Is it big enough? So are we doing this renovation and getting everything we need to make these elementary schools what they need to be going forward, where class size is the right size, we have the right infrastructure and technology, the right systems, all of that? I think that's an overarching question we sort of need to think about when we're talking about this big of a dollar number for these projects, which, by the way, don't include Middlesex or the high school yet. So, it's something I think we need to think about. I think these plans are amazing. Thank you. And I think the space is incredible. I have more pointed questions on the space, but that's something I wanted to sort of throw out there.
So I would say that this is definitely a process of iteration, right, in terms of what we learn, because the scope of what John's company was asked to do was not clearly to completely renovate the complete building, but at the same time there was enough scope in there if there were things that made sense to do with the portables or the libraries and it impacted something else. John has brought that to the table in some limited scope. The idea of like renovating as new or just add-ons or stuff, John, I would ask you too, because when I go to the States, sometimes I just don't like putting on something at the end of something, right? As an example. So given that is like that, like what's your take on that? How that, like that question that Katie asked, if it's so great in scope, do we have to like consider, like, is that money well invested, or would they even allow us to do that, right? And because I know
So there's probably three. The first thing, it all depends what the day is when we're talking about the state.
that is true.
I would say that based on, so I'll give the blanket statement that based on your enrollments and enrollment projections, the state will tell you these schools are already oversized. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's what the state is going to say, that they're already at or maybe a little over what the enrollment figures would tell them the square footage has to be. There's always the potential that you could and these ideas were not Renovate is new. These ideas were to provide an addition and replace the portables. I mean, there's always the possibility you could make the argument that at least give us the square foot we're taking offline for these portables, because we're doing a tremendous enhancement to educational space in the state by eliminating these portables. So there's a potential to make the case there. But for the most part, and that's looking at the early numbers, that was just looking at early numbers. I mean, if we delve into it, maybe if some of I'd have to go back and look at the 8-year projections, but if there's something in there in that 7 to 8 year range that, yeah, I don't think it's going to be all 3 schools either. It could be that it's just Royal, because I think Royal is the one that had some, I know there's been talk of more higher density housing in the Royal neighborhood, I think it was, but even so, I think Royal's the largest building possibly. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of, from the state perspective, their general mantra has been, do what you're doing at Ox Ridge, just tear it all down, build new, and we'll grant you full reimbursement for it. And I know and they're telling the same thing to other districts. So that gets to be expensive for a town like this that doesn't have a high reimbursement rate. And I know it works for it's really working for a lot of towns, but it doesn't necessarily work here. So that's part of why I think that's part of why trying to look I'll just, I know I'm going beyond what you asked for here, but I will also add we did take a look with Mike and Rich very early on and said, if we're talking X square feet for an addition, what threshold of an addition or addition and demo do we really, are we really chasing our tail with doing this? And we felt that this wasn't getting there yet, that these additions and targeted renovations are really in the spirit of making the absolute best of what is really good buildings. I mean, I think Holmes is a great building too. They have great components. They've been very well maintained and transformed over time. And this is kind of that next transformation that could be done. It could be done all at once. It could be done fairly quickly. We tried to look at ways we could, Hindley does have a little bit of the issue with overlapping one of the portables there, but that doesn't mean we can't massage that plan a little. And if it determined that we can't use, if we can phase it in a way that you can not have to use that portable for a year, then you can start building there, populate the new area, come back, do some renovations, and really it could be done in a fairly low impact way, as well as far as construction and logistics and operations. They don't, at none of the schools do we really come in and start messing with the site as far as parking and roads and buses and access and parent drop off and all that. They're very isolated in terms of their impact on the site. So a lot of that went into that consideration about, are these really focused renovation and addition projects within a target zone? Now, maybe they are within area, but maybe they're not within dollars yet, and that's something we want to go through and talk about. If the dollar figure needs to be adjusted, we also went as looking at the dollars for these are really looking at per square foot new addition, per square foot renovation. Some of the complication of renovation, some of the complication of phasing, if in fact there were priorities that were established and it was determined that one school had to go first and be expedited, we looked at the numbers reflect some of those considerations. Then on top of that, the numbers look at, we tried to focus on the reason why we gave a range. We could probably put out a construction rough order magnitude construction cost, but the reason why we gave a range is we wanted to also roll in potential soft costs, the furniture, the technology, the design fees, et cetera. So those ranges reflect project cost, and they will vary greatly. They'll vary based on abatement reports and whatnot, all the study and research that has to go into making these projects real. So that's why we wanted to make sure we gave some ranges and not just a single dollar number at this point.
So staying on the dollars then for a moment, did you review our original master plan when you, I assume, as part of your methodology?
The KG&D master plan?
The KG&D study.
Yes, we did review that.
Okay, and that comes in at about 24 million. So I'd love to understand your review of that, and then if you could just talk a little bit to the delta, because this plan is 31 to 39 million, and we were probably anticipating something closer to 24. So what's the difference, and what did you find in the KG&D study?
Yeah. So the KG&D study that we, the information we reviewed there was that largely those proposals, and I don't know what was ultimately decided. I think I'm remembering maybe multiple options still for each school,
Sure.
but so there may have been a decision made on certain ones, but Holmes is Mike was kind of mentioning to me, he's like, wow, so Holmes looks a lot like the study did, the KG&D study, but I think that's because there were some really good things put forward there. So when we were looking at Holmes, it didn't have a new gym and it didn't have a new media center. So I think from that perspective, we were looking at that as a really good option for how to incorporate the changes at Holmes. When we looked at Hindley and Royal, those did start to diverge quite a bit. The idea of getting a larger gym, the idea of having the new library media center and it being a little bit larger than was before. And then you get into the interior renovation elements. And I think that's a little bit also of where some of those costs are, start to come into play. And the fact that we're vacating, DLC and ELP and transforming those spaces as well. The other part of it is what we have seen in the market. And you guys know all too well. I mean, I know Oxford is out to bid right now, in fact, I think, and so it's then looking at projecting these projects out a couple years. So that includes some projections as far as time goes through a couple of at least a couple years out in terms of when these projects would actually be bid and constructed.
Accelerating one or the others. Mike, what is your thought on how you would roll these 3 projects out?
Well, but I'd always thought that you would do 2 at a time. So they would all get finished when Ox Ridge was finished or a year after. So you would do 2 of the elementaries now and then the other elementary and possibly the middle school. So you would bundle them together. So because they are small enough that they're short duration projects. They're not, none of these are, 2-3 year projects where you got to make swing space and move people around a lot. You can build, move in, renovate, or demolish existing. They're kind of clean that way.
How long would you say start to finish? And I ask that question because obviously now in COVID, we're using the portables as functional space.
Right.
So I imagine you can keep portables functioning if COVID happens to, the pandemic goes into next school year, and do the construction while the portables are still in use, with the exception of maybe at Hindley, you have one overlapping area.
I would think, when you actually start the project, do the ed specs, go to the Board of Selectmen for a committee, for a Citizens Building Committee, and go through that whole process to, opening the door and sitting in a classroom or the library, you're looking at 24 months. And that's why you would want to do 2 at a time rather than just one and then one and then one. You would want to do 2 at the same time.
But on that note, Mike, what is the impact to the function of the school during, or John, during the, that 24, during that 24-month duration, or particularly during construction?
Well, say take Hindley as an example. You could have your staging area for all your construction on the side of the building where the pre-K used to have the playground there. I guess that's the east side of the building, right? Yeah. Or the south side of the building. So they could come in that entrance and be out of everybody's way, do the addition and get out. At Holmes, you rearrange the exiting for that wing of the school building and start work. You're not bothering anybody. Royal, you got to figure a way to get to the back of the building, past the cafeteria, the bus drop off, the playground, and go all the way to the back of the building and it might be as simple as, setting up a temporary construction road along the side of the property, away from Mansfield, the other side of the property, running in that way, the west side, I guess it is. So you're coming in and staying away from everybody to get, fenced in, go to the back and do your work. I think Royal is the one school that's going to have you're going to have to do some thinking on how to maintain school while construction's going on, because you're going to have to demolish some classrooms while you build. So it may be that you put some portables somewhere, move those people, now you can demolish and build.
You could use the three
three
ELP
pre-K.
rooms that are coming out. So temporarily you could use, you have a 3 to 4 swap there. So, you might be one class, depending on what the need is for that particular year, there might be an opportunity to pick up that 4th classroom somewhere in your existing building after the fall of 2022.
Yeah, but at Royal, there's 7 spaces that you're going to impact. Four classrooms, there's an office there, and then there's just 3 portables. So at 7 spaces, you're taking away. You've got 3 in the building, maybe a 4th. You've got to find some other spaces that don't currently exist. So that's going to be the impact one. And all the additions that have been discussed at the middle school have dealt with expanding the number of classrooms. And the way the building was constructed, there's a section on the corner there by like room 146, those 3 stories, there's utilities and stuff that ends right there. And that was built that way so that when an addition was being made, that's where it was supposed to go. So that could be a real standalone project, because there's a separate way to get in back there on a paved road. You're not impacting the school at all. Every utility you tie into can stay functioning while you're tying in. So it's really, that would be the least impactful one, that one. Hope that answers.
Should we get into the actual space, the library media common space?
Sure.
Do you want, so can we pull up the slide on that?
It was the last.
If you just do the prototype one, right, the first one.
Prototype, yes, put
Yeah.
it back 2 slides.
I love the layout. I love the concept. My question would be, how do you envision, and maybe this is more to Alan, students using this space? So like maker space and the presentation area, do you envision it where classrooms will be coming in and using it? Is there still like library time in the elementary school? I mean, I think the space is amazing. I just want to make sure we're going to be using it to its fullest, and classes will be engaging in all these spaces. So could you just talk a little bit about how elementary students will use this space?
I think that's an ongoing discussion, Katie, to be honest with you. In some cases, the elementary classes come into the libraries with their teachers, and at some grade levels they do not, right?
Right.
And that's, I'll call it the responsibility of the librarian in that capacity. So he or she, as a librarian, would bring the kids into that particular area for a particular purpose and a particular part of the curriculum. It poses the whole question about like the vision for. I do think it's important probably that we do articulate that, to be honest with you, because it sort of drives this. Is it more experiential in nature, or is it instruction from a teacher point of view or a media center perspective? So currently we have a mixture of those. And I think that there's a wee bit of a room there for
Yeah,
exploration.
I think it's a huge investment in a lot of space, and I think we need to be intentional about how we develop curriculum or ways that students are engaging in this. I mean, I think the opportunities for creative learning and experiential learning are incredible, but I want to make sure we have it. We don't just build it and no one
Right.
uses it.
There are some guiding documents through the Library Reimagined. I didn't bring those this morning, but I should. I'll bring those next time or share those that sort of dictate that a little bit. But in practice too, I'd also like it to be in practice. What does that look like in practice?
So on that topic, does the Oxridge Library that's being built follow the same formula of sort of this modularization? How does it compare? And how was the build at Oxridge used as part of informing this project?
Well, I'll actually, John had consultation with SLAM in terms of, and looked at the plans and had discussions and communication with them to make sure that this, in design for these components, if you remember the step down in the Oxridge one, it has these types of components. But John, you can talk about the communication you've had in terms of Oxridge.
Sure. I think one of the key differences, and this is something that I was understood the design process was going through Oxridge, was that some of the more active learning spaces, whether it be the maker space or small group work areas, those were being kind of offloaded or strategically placed around the building as a kind of discovery zones or things that happen within groups and pods of classrooms, because that's how that building was being laid out. It was being laid out in where there were rooms and clusters, as opposed to the double loaded corridors we have in all of these three buildings. So to try to implement that decentralized model at these three schools was a real physical challenge. And it didn't lend itself well to that. So the idea was to kind of bring it back and say, okay, we don't have the opportunity to physically do the decentralized version. Let's figure out a way that we can go back to having it centralized here, and how would that look? So so a lot of the components are the same. It's just that some of the you still have all the printed collection in one space, and you have a presentation area in one space. But for the overwhelming most, that those elements still occur within a central location at Oxridge. But it is those those pieces like makerspace, small group workroom, and then maybe some of the other story time presentation zone areas that are pulled out into those classroom pods at Oxridge. Does that kind of answer the question?
So just in terms then of aggregate space, do we know the square footage of the library at Oxridge off the top of our heads by any chance?
I thought it was a little over 2,000. Yeah.
It's
About 2,100.
about 2,100. Okay. Thank you. Can we go over the impact to classrooms? 'Cause from what I understood you to say, really our goal is just to replace portables. We weren't looking to add classrooms. So if I go through the detail, it looks like at Hindley, we're actually down one, but you're saying they're configured better.
Yeah, Hindley, so Hindley is the only one where we started, because we were, there was such an initial thrust in terms of those classroom sizes on the second floor. We did start in with, let's look at grade distribution to an extent, and let's look at what the numbers are per grade and things. So I would say that with Hindley, yes, we did end up with a net decrease in numbers of classrooms because we were breaking down some walls and trying to open them up. But when we did the grade distribution, we still had a spare classroom. So even with the net reduction of one. So that's something that I think rather than, you know, that is one for Hindley, and then certainly for Royal and Holmes. I think it's going to be important to kind of go back to the numbers then and really focus on numbers, and then go through grade distributions and see where those all come out as well in terms of classroom numbers.
So can you talk to us about what I'm a little concerned with in the plan is the disparity a little bit between the Holmes and the other libraries, as well as the small class. And my main focus is the small classrooms at Royal, which you've left. So you've identified how to renovate them at Hindley, but not at Royal. So there's still 6 small classrooms at Royal. Can you discuss that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as the plan at Royal does need some further study. So I'll say right off the bat.
And having said that, I realize this is out of the scope of the project. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
venturing into somewhere else. So.
Yeah, so I think the information was evolving as we got into this. It happened to be that the teachers grabbed us right away at Hindley and said, we've got this problem. We didn't, sometimes the problems at the different schools didn't get as, maybe not at the same time. So we're kind of playing a collection game of getting all the information and pulling it all together. And so for Hindley, it may have, for Holmes had a different problem. Holmes had all of these offices and support spaces that weren't necessarily in the right place or serving the right function. So those two became part of the plan. But I think Royal does need some more study. So we would be looking to delve into that some more at Royal to make sure that we've got the right classroom count, again, by grade distribution and at the sizes that it needs to be. The other part of the question had to do with Holmes and the Library Media Center. We looked a little bit at other ways we could transform Holmes. One of those, we looked at an early option at Holmes to say, like, could we move the media center and try to use the old media center to create some classroom spaces. We even looked at the volume of Holmes. Mike knows we went up in the attic there to take a good look at what the roof structure is at Holmes, because by all appearances, it looks like you should be able to fit another floor in there. You really can't without totally changing out the roof structure. Those are deep trusses up there in that attic, and that's just one of the things. By going up and looking, we were able to determine, okay, that's not the solution here at Holmes. If I would say if the Library Media Center space at Holmes is an issue, we're certainly open to looking at maybe there is an addition that needs to happen there to open up that space a little bit more to get us more space for it.
Just a question. I think as you said, I think the space itself is a glorious space. The big windows, the tall ceilings. I think it's a wonderful room. Just curious about that it's a third less size of the other ones. That's all. But I think you bring up an interesting point with the roof, and so a question to Mr. Lynch is if we do this work at Holmes and all of this work of the library will not be impacted by the roof work that we're planning on doing at Holmes as well, correct?
No impact.
So it's just exterior and this is nothing exterior to do as well. So we won't be, to Katie's point, we won't be throwing money and then having to renovate that in 2 or 3 years.
No.
Okay.
So one of the things that's a little different than the original scope of the project is the renovated gymnasiums. If we were to not do that, does that throw your entire project out the window, or can you talk about the impact of that?
Sure. Yeah, I think to not do the gymnasiums would mean that we would then look at adding music and band in the area pretty much where the gym was, because that was an early option at Hindley and at Royal was we're building we'd be building new music and band rooms at pretty much in the footprint. It would be smaller, certainly. So it would be smaller, new addition, less cost. So that would be that would certainly be part of the outlook there. We had I know I'm trying to go through the different options.
But can I just ask?
Yeah.
But you put it in because, other than you're an architect, which, so, but you put it in because why?
Well, partially because it was strongly suggested that this is a top priority, that it's a priority that across the district there could be some mention of disparity between the new gym at Ox Ridge versus the gyms at the other elementaries, and the greatest needs were Royal and Hindley. If those that was one part of it. The other part of it had to do with the size of the gym for educational purpose. The other had to do with the size of a space that could accommodate a large group of people. We were told early that the auditorium or the gym at either of those schools was limiting in terms of the size of the type of event that could be done for parents and grandparents and getting people into the school. So the gym gave a larger gym gives an opportunity for a larger space for people to gather. Even if it's not a dedicated performance space, it's still a space to hold a larger event or be flexible enough for a big science fair or another bigger event that needs a large volume. And really the one of the things, even though it is smaller than Ox Ridge, the main basketball floor is still the same size as Ox Ridge. It's just Ox Ridge had a little bit more width because of the cross courts there. We would still have 6 baskets in the gym, but the difference is that you'd have the same length of the gym as Ox Ridge. The cross courts would be a little narrower.
How does it compare in size to Tokenique? Because Tokenique was built undersized for the capacity of the building.
Mike, you might want to remind, Tokenique is about the size of Holmes.
A little small. It's about 2,200. Tokenique would end up being the smallest elementary school gymnasium under this plan.
I guess my question would be then, if we're building them as additions on the buildings, let's just make sure they're big enough so we don't have any issues.
Just make sure what, Kate? Yeah? Oh, okay.
Mike, do we know the sizes of the different school gyms?
The sizes of the gymnasiums at all the schools, they range between like 22 and 2,400 square feet at the elementaries.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go by memory. Royal and Hindley were both around 2,200 square feet. Holmes was, I think, more like 25 or 2,600. We have that'll be part of our full report too.
Hindley's 2395.
Okay.
Holmes I don't have written down. And Royal I had. Royal is 2327.
What's the square footage of the new ones?
4,700, 4,700.
So in terms of parity, Tokenique, because it has that large hall that can be used as a gathering space, it doesn't need its gym to serve that function. Whereas the other elementary schools need that second function. Is that what you're saying? And does Holmes, is Holmes solved for in this project?
Well, Holmes was I think closer to 2,700. So it was yeah, again, Holmes, I think maybe it wasn't expressed as a major concern at Holmes. It was something that in terms of the ability to have a large enough space for all parents to gather, I think Holmes didn't have that same concern.
Meaning that the population didn't express the same concern. Alan, there is actually a place for people to gather with parents and grandparents on that campus.
I mean, they use, you're talking about Homes? They typically would use the cafeteria area also.
Okay.
When that gets cleared out, and they use, because there's a performing area up there as well as the cafeteria.
Okay.
Typically, that's the area I think they would use.
Okay. How big is that area, Mike?
The cafeteria is a little under 2,000 square feet. For about 1,800.
One other question for me is, you mentioned that to remove the library at Hindley and the rationale for that. If I'm looking at these designs correctly, it's also to remove the library at Royal.
Yes.
So why would you remove the library at Royal? I don't think
Basically the same reason as Hindley. It's the vintage of construction from the 1960s, early 70s. It's not as just in terms of construction methods, materials. The one at Royal has also has some heating issues, and that has the older windows as well that would need new windows. I believe it has some roof issues. So I think in terms of Royal had more physical needs there. It also has an ADA issue that the grade around Royal's Library Media Center lowers as you get out into the field. So there's a stair in the far egress area. So I would say those physical issues are a big driver for why Royal would look at taking that media center volume back off the building.
When will we see the library plans, media center plans for the high school and middle school, just to be able to have a comprehensive view of everything?
I would say within a couple of weeks.
So Dennis, is your plan, like where do we go from here? I have a couple questions on that in terms of presenting to the full board and how this fits into or integrates or supersedes our master plan. Like the scope of this seems bigger than what we originally intended. And a lot of it overlaps with our current master plan and is different from our master plan. So I think we need to be strategic about how we bring this to the full board and what this is in terms of our master plan.
Yeah, so So I would love to have a discussion on that. For me, Katie, I think, as I started off, I think this is a little more ambitious than we thought. But having said that, maybe this is the proper way to go. So I think we need to, literally we've had this for less than 24 hours to digest. I think we need some time to contemplate and think. But I agree. I think I'm not sure we're ready to present this to the board. At least I'm not. I don't know if the rest feel the same. I'm not sure if it's proper to come back and say, can we bring down a scaled down version of what this would be? I don't know if that's what the committee would like to do as well.
Well, I guess Alan and Mike, well, how do you see this vis-a-vis the master plan? We have that master plan sitting
Sure.
out there that is,
Right.
a roadmap for us, and then this.
Well, I look at it as it's an extension of the master plan. The existing master plan is due, it's a 5-year plan from December of 2015, 2016. So it's a mature master plan now. It's time to start looking at another 5-year update of it, which would commence in about a year from now. So I just see these plans as just taking the original master plan, which was more or less a snapshot at each building, and then trying to project going forward. I think they looked at everything except roofs and parking lots. So this is just kind of an extension of that, and that taking into account more variables.
Mrs. Stein, this is a commissioned plan by the Board of Education, so it is further than the scope of what the board commissioned. However, Mr. Maroney, I would suggest you present it to the board so that the board can decide what scope or whether they are curtailing scope, because that will inform the facilities committee's work. I don't think the facilities committee itself could either expand or contract the scope of a contracted study.
Fair.
I would agree. I think the only question is whether we want to go with any more information than what we have today, because I agree, this is bigger than the scope. So, do we have a ballpark for the cost of the next set of work for the middle school, Tokenique, and high school?
So could I just preempt it? I would be careful estimating overall costs until we decide the plan. I think we heard that very strongly from the town and Kate Bush, and it was good advice that probably best we decide on scope and then go back, scope of work needed to be completed, and then go back and understand dollar figures other than, and Mrs. McCammon, this may be what you're asking for, very, very rough numbers that we also caution publicly are very rough ranges, because I think we've seen it happen with multiple bids. That in an effort to be fully transparent, we sometimes have rushed the monetary side of it until we have full information.
So John, you're coming back in a couple of weeks with the middle school, high school sort of suggestions?
Yes, so the plans for middle school, high school, Tokenique, library, media centers would have plan layouts for those spaces.
I think we wait and have the full thing and bring the full thing to the board. I just think doing it piecemeal it's hard to do it in a vacuum like that, personally.
Do you agree?
Alan?
Yep, please.
If the committee agrees, I would suggest the analysis, pardon me, I would suggest the further analysis of the classroom spaces, because those issues are going to come up at a board level too, right? The same types of questions, which takes a little bit further than what we have here today. And there's a couple of questions came up from the board about that. I think if that was further delineated as part of, because they're questions that need to be answered anyway, right?
I agree.
Well, that dovetails into the second agenda item that we have today.
Mhm.
So I think Katie brings up a good segue. So our second agenda item,
So should we just agree to next steps then? So we're going to wait to get we'll meet again with the information on the next 3 spaces and the additional class size analysis. We'll meet again on those 2 things, and then our plan is to bring it to the board. Okay.
Okay.
But in the meantime, we'll update the board on where we are.
Yes. So our next agenda item is discussion and design of elementary classrooms to accommodate the class size policy. I think I mistyped and I believe it should be say educational class size standards, not a policy, but, so I apologize for that. But I think, John, what we're trying to get to here is that I think traditionally we have looked at our class size standards based on the number of teachers and kind of looking at it at a budgetary focus. And I'm wondering if we can look at it as a space focus and say, how much space do we have and how much can we accommodate the optimal level of classes versus the high level of classes? And do we have the space to meet optimal at every grade level? And then the question to Alan as well is, if we don't, how would we prioritize that? So is that a fair question to you, or?
Absolutely, yeah. I completely agree. I think that it is, looking at it from the educational standpoint is really a good thing, that you want to understand the ideal number of students. You have a range, and you're always going to have a range because you have to operate within ranges. But what we can do is we can look at the high number of students, compare that to the space, the ideal space for that number, and then start looking at, okay, where are the critical issues within the building based upon current and projected enrollment, and then based upon grade distribution. So, because that always comes into play as well. So, and we know that that's going to have some flexibility too. You may, since your numbers for kindergarten and kindergarten and first grade, second and third and fourth and fifth, I think are about the same. That gives you a little bit of grade distribution flexibility as well within your building. So, I think that would be an ideal step here to tie in with what's being done with this study, because of the fact that early on Hindley mentioned it, and then it's come up a bit with Royal as well. So I would say it's a logical step to take.
Can I ask a preliminary question? I feel like this is a little out of our purview, talking about class size policy, facilities meeting. I'm not sure this was board directed. If so, I missed it. So I just want to know why this is on the agenda and what our purview is in talking about class size policy.
It's just to understand if this is something we should be looking at to understand how to best formulate a plan going forward.
Well, because I think the point is to understand that I know the state has said we have the right number of classrooms, but against our class size policy, what does it look like at the building level? And so then when we go and say that we need 23 classrooms at homes, or whoever had 23, how does that reconcile against our enrollment and our policy? So I would agree with you, policy is not our remit, but understanding how policy and our actual enrollment fit on the buildings is our remit, arguably, but.
Yeah, so maybe it is a facility capacity study based on your class size standards.
Yeah.
Yes, and if the board if the board asks clarification about, well, just a clarification question, can we accommodate the high side or not the high side? If we can accommodate the high side of class size or can't accommodate the high side, I just would want to make sure that I've got a thoughtful, comprehensive response back to the size of the classrooms, basically.
I guess I sort of thought the discussion was COVID related, not a broader board goal, but if it is, that's fine. I know, we discreetly discussed the issue with Ox Ridge based on COVID and the 6 feet distancing, but to my recollection, we didn't have a full board conversation about evaluating our class size policy in the framework of our facilities.
No, other way around. And I don't think the purpose is to evaluate the policy.
Right.
The purpose is to make sure that we build the correct number of classrooms. So when we say we want to take away our portables and add, what is the correct number of classrooms? The state would be one input in terms of what they believe, but also our just what our class size policy determines would be another.
So, Mr. Maroney, is there a further clarification on agenda item number 2, class size policy, class sizing
Yeah.
as based on
Yeah.
the plan being presented? It is not a
Physical
holistic,
sizing.
is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
Is that,
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
yeah.
I'm more
I
comfortable with
I
that.
would suggest an amendment to the agenda to reflect that, both the correction you made at the top and an accurate depiction of what this discussion is, because I think that's where the confusion's occurring.
Yeah, I worry when we bring the class size policy conversation in, that we could, Jill, do it the way I'm saying, people could back into it, and
Understood. And Alan, I think one of the questions.
So I would suggest an amendment to the agenda to accurately reflect the conversation.
Would you like to, I would like to propose an amendment to the agenda. Do I have a second? That we say discussion and design of elementary classrooms to not accommodate, what would be the right word?
John, can you give us the right words?
Yeah,
But I think I had said it's a facility study to look at capacity based on class size standards,
And
your
enrollment.
class size standards.
Within the proposed plan.
Thank you. Okay. Okay,
second?
all in favor?
Yay. One last point with this, and I'm not sure if this is, we're still currently having the students who are in Avalon go to Tokenique, correct?
Right, yeah.
So have we built moving the Avalon students back to their neighborhood school in these ideas, or no?
I haven't looked at that, Dennis, to be honest
Okay,
with you.
just a question.
I haven't looked at that.
Again, we have not discussed that at the board table, but I don't know if that's something we want to look at as well. So,
Well, that wasn't part of the charge for.
no,
for-
understood,
yeah,
understood,
yeah.
but I just wonder if that is something
Oh.
we can bring back. And it's just something that popped into my head here, so.
When we see capacity, I think that will be interesting, but let's start with that capacity study. What do you think?
Okay, thank you, John and Alan and everyone. And
Thank you.
are we ready for public comment?
Yes. If you would like to speak during public comment, click the participant's icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and/or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes for comment. No raised hands at this time.
Okay. Entertain a motion. Alan?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that I understand the next level of the process, that at our next regularly scheduled facilities committee meeting, we would hear the next iteration of the report and then thereafter go to the board. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.